Welcome to my review of the Cuphead DLC, the Delicious Last Course. And this is my review for the game. I have a tutorial up as well, which I will drop a link for in the description. It took me around 5 hours and 45 minutes to beat. And what this DLC adds, mainly, it adds an extra island to the base game. So, in order to access it, you may have to beat a few bosses in the main game. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but of course there's the base game, which was released in 2017. And this is kind of like a late add-on to that game. And what it basically adds, the complete package basically gives you 6 new main bosses. And then you have a secret boss, which is a shorter boss fight, but it is an extra boss. And then there's maybe another 5 or 6 shorter boss fights in the form of these parry fights where you can only use parries to fight the bosses, which is a cool idea. It is missing the run and gun stages, so there's no side-scroll stages as far as like side-scrolling action stages or anything like that. It's purely boss fights. And you have 3 new weapons, I believe, as well, which is a tornado, a crack shot, which is another homing type of shot, similar to the chaser, but I like it a lot better. And then there is a converged shot, which is basically like the spread shot, but it goes across the screen. But it does pretty good damage. It's a shotgun kind of spread. So the weapons definitely add something to the game, but the main thing that was added, aside from all the extra bosses, is the ability to play as Miss Chalice. Now, using her requires that you use up one of your charm slots on your Mugman. You have to put a cookie charm in there, and that'll let you play as her. So, when you use her, you sacrifice the ability to equip that extra charm that you would with the Mugman. So she maxes out at 4 hit points. And of course, with the Mugman, you can use a charm that gets your hit points up to 5. So that's the one disadvantage of using her. And she plays quite a bit different. These are the parry bosses. Here's one of them. As you can see, when she does an air dash or any kind of dash, it's a parry as well. So it actually makes it a lot easier to parry a lot of shit, I find. And the best feature she has is an invincible roll. So if you press down and Y, which is your dash button, you will do an invincible roll, which has some frames of invincibility and it covers a large distance. So it's great for dodging. You can spam the shit out of it. There's no cooldowns or anything like that. So those are like her best features, really. She's really worth learning how to use. I think she was intended for newer players in some ways, but it's very well balanced into the main game. It doesn't feel cheap or anything like that. But it is different skills as far as, learning how to play as her definitely feels a lot different than the Mugman. The way that they parry is definitely different. There's a different feel to it. She also has a double jump. So she has quite a few differences from the Mugman, which play identical to each other. So with that said, that's all the content that's included in the DLC as far as what it includes. And I mean, for $8, it's an awesome fucking price, as far as that goes. So I'll probably give it 2 scores, one based on what you get for the price, and the other would just be based on how it holds up as its own game. But it is better to have completed the base game before you get this DLC because, you carry over your weapons and all that shit. And of course, any experience you have with the game, you're going to want to be pretty good at the game before starting this DLC. This would be a hard DLC to start on because these bosses are about equivalent to the difficulty of maybe the final island of the game or something like that. So they, from what I remember, so they're pretty hard. So they're not the best bosses to start with because even the bosses on the first island can be kind of challenging in the original Cuphead. So these are kind of like later boss type difficulty. So keep that in mind before starting it. But you can jump into it though. It'll just be a hard one to start with. So it would be recommended to unlock some good shit from the base game, like the better weapons and charms, and unlock some of that, and then bring that shit over into this. I think would be the best way to go about it. So this is another parry boss. Now this one was the weakest of the boss fights because it's a very tedious, just waiting for a certain attack, and the boss will kind of taunt you, and you have to try to get him to do a certain move. So that's the most tedious, and I break all that down in the tutorial, but that was maybe the weakest part of the game. But that was only one little boss, and that's one of the optional bosses. The main boss fights are these. These are the regular length boss fights that are multi-phase. And these ones, they can take a few minutes for these bosses to go down, maybe 3 or 4 minutes or something like that. But they go on for a while. And this was one of the harder ones. This one's pretty tough because you got to manipulate the plane, while the boss is attacking you. Now, this first phase didn't give me too much trouble, but later on, you have a part where the controls get reversed, which can be tough to adapt to, but there is ways around that to make it more manageable, as I break down in the tutorial. But yeah, all the mechanics are really well done. Each boss fight feels very, different than the other one. So they definitely have like a lot of uniqueness to them. Of course, whenever you see anything that's pink, that's shit that you can parry, and by parrying those pink items, you build up your super meter. Now, she also has 3 new super meter abilities that the Mugmen don't have, and one of them is the ability to take an extra hit. If you use a full meter, you can store an extra hit point, basically, which is really, really good. She also has a horizontal firing super attack that sends out an army of Mugmen, or whatever the hell they are, towards the enemy and does a lot of damage. And she also has a completely vertical firing that's similar. It's a vertical beam that comes out of her head, and it's similar to the horizontal attack. So you have, you can select which one of those you want before each boss fight. You can always change your loadouts before each boss fight. And, you can even switch characters. But this character is definitely worth learning how to use. She has a lot of advantages over the Mugmen, I think. It's worth losing that extra hit point most of the time for the ability to double jump, and the invincible dash is really good. And just being able to parry shit by dashing into it is a huge improvement, as far as it just feels a lot better. Because with the Mugmen, you have to kind of do a somersault in the air to do your parries, which is a little bit more of a pain in the ass to land. Now, this is the secret boss fight, which I explain how to unlock it in my tutorial, so I'll go into all the detail on that there. And this is just a single phase fight, but it is an additional boss fight that you get with this content, and it is cool. It's just very short. So it maybe took me a few tries to beat, and it's only one phase that's maybe a little bit lengthy, but it's quite an easy fight, but it's cool. You can see that invincible roll really in action here, how you can just roll through multiple attacks at once if you line it up right. It's really, really good. So now we have this is another one of the fights, the gnome, which I was surprised to beat it on my first try when I went back to it recently. Though I had tried it a few times some days prior, but I had seen this beaten a few times in various streaming videos and shit like that. So I had an idea, and I got pretty sloppy here, but I still managed to be able to beat it on my first try that day. But these fights can be very challenging. As you can see, multi-phase, like all these fights are pretty much multi-phase. If you're familiar with the original game, then you know exactly what this shit is. You'll be familiar with everything that's in this, because it's the same structure. And it's the same awesome presentation. The presentation is some of the best of this kind of game. It's extremely impressive. And it really does match what it's trying to represent, which is, I think, cartoons from the 30s and shit like that, but it looks like a playable fucking cartoon pretty much. And you have one shooter style stage, which were present in the base game as well, but here you only have one that's like this. And this was the hardest for me, along with the dog on the plane. And in these shooter stages, you have bombs and straight shots, and your super move, which turns into a missile. But it's a multi-phase fight. It's very cool. And after each fight, you get a ranking as well. So you can try to get S rankings. That's a replay element. And after you beat the game on regular, you unlock the expert mode as well. So you can fight all the bosses on expert mode. You can choose the difficulty before each boss fight. So that gives it a lot of replay, because you can go through the expert mode, and I'm sure that's a good bit challenging. I didn't try it yet. So this is the final boss. But yeah, I did try expert in the base game, and it was quite a bit harder. It was definitely cool. I still want to complete that. One great thing about this DLC is you can bring all the new weapons and the new character into the base game, back into the base game. So you can complete whatever boss fights you didn't complete yet on the base game. And that's actually not a bad reason to get the DLC too. I mean, you could, if you're having trouble with the base game, you could unlock this character and use it on the core game. So that could be very useful, and it gives you a different way to play the bosses. So it's definitely cool. I mean, overall, you get a lot of content. But yeah, top-notch presentation and, super satisfying boss fights and challenge in this game. It always had great boss fights. Really satisfying to beat the bosses. And that carries over to this game, just like the original. The only area where this falters compared to the original game is that it's just a lot shorter. You know what I mean? That's about it. But it's pretty much more of the same, and I would say there's some improvements. Like some of the boss fights are a little bit more interesting as far as like the parry bosses. They did some interesting shit to like kind of shake it up with that. And some of the new weapons are great. The new character is one of the main highlights because she really makes it play a lot different. Makes the fights feel a lot different and feels great to use. So those are definitely huge advantages. So yeah, if you enjoyed the first game, then this is very easy to recommend. But if you're intimidated by the difficulty of these kind of games, I would say that this would be a good game for any players. I mean, of course, it's going to be more tolerable for more advanced players, obviously. It's a very hard game. One of the hardest indie games to be released, I would say, among them. And this carries over that tradition, but it is a lot more approachable than the first game because of this character really does make it a lot more approachable. But regardless of skill level, you will have to be persistent to beat the bosses, you know what I mean? And it's just, lesser skilled players are just going to take a lot longer to beat the bosses, but you should be learning, you know what I mean? I mean, there is some dense and fast-moving shit, but the more you play, you start to get a feel for everything, and it starts to kind of come together. And some players, if you're new to these kind of games, then I guess this would be a very hard game to start with, but I would recommend it for most players that it's worth overcoming the challenge, and it should make you a better player as well if you are newer to games. But overall, I would give this a 9 out of 10, just like I would the base game. But the only problem is that it's short. That's the only issue. But for the price, I would say it's a 10 out of 10. I mean, I can't think of any other games that come out for $8 that offer this kind of content. And I would say it's definitely worth picking up. If you have any questions, let me know. And thanks for watching.